Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Matt the Family Guy, Kent the Cat Guy, and me, Greg the Single Guy. We are recording episodes from around the globe to tell you about the best kept secret in education. That's right, it's teaching overseas. We're glad to have you join us. And welcome to this episode of the International Teacher Podcast. Unfortunately, Matt, the Family Guy, is not with me. It's a little bit early in the day, and Kent, the Cat Guy, is working on another podcast, so he's not able to join us. But I do have a very special guest. Her name is Teacher Diane, if I called her that, according to her book that's coming out June 20th, called Kindergarten at 60, I believe. Diane, am I right about that, the titles there?
Yes, the title's Kindergarten at 60. The subtitle is A Memoir of Teaching in Thailand, and that's exactly what it's about. It's about teaching in Thailand. I'm an American, and I was teaching in Thailand at age 60, not having ever taught in Thailand before, actually not ever having taught kindergarten before, so kind of a second act story for me. And yeah, the book's coming out in June. Thank you for your interest in the story.
No problem. I love having you on here because most of our guests are either looking at international teaching or looking at international schools, or they might be overseas already. We have about 100 countries that are represented from listeners, as far as we know from our data. What I really loved about this is that you sent me an early copy of your book, and I had a chance to read it. Can I just quote real quickly a little bit from your book? Is that okay?
That would be an honor. Go right ahead.
Because this really sets the stage for all of us, whether you're going to international schools or a small school, a local school overseas. Here's what Diane wrote. We're in the stage of life relatively new to our species called active retirement. I don't know how a demographer or a sociologist would define it, but I'd say it's a time when you're still willing, parentheses, if sensibly somewhat hesitant, close comma, to go outside your comfort zone and do something worthwhile. The challenge is you never know how far outside or how worthwhile until you give it a try. And I hope I really got the heart of your book there because you're going way outside your comfort zone. Can you tell us a little bit about you and your husband before what you did prior to getting 60?
Sure. So, Steve, my husband is named Steve, and he and I were both involved in climate change work. He was involved from the policy side, sort of trying to negotiate international agreements to protect the global environment. I was a research scientist, and I studied climate change in the upper air. So we had long careers in the U.S. federal government, him at the Environmental Protection Agency, me at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We live in the Washington, D.C. area, and we both retired relatively early and then pursued some other interests. For me, the other interests included teaching English as a second language here in Washington. Where there's a school, Washington English Center for Immigrants. Steve eventually joined me there as a volunteer, so we were both teaching English as volunteers. And eventually we decided, well, wouldn't it be fun to try teaching English someplace else so that we could have a living abroad experience while also working or volunteering and sort of becoming part of a community, not just being tourists as retired people. We know lots of folks who retire and then travel, sort of bounce around the world and do a country in a week and come back home and show you their pictures. But we wanted a richer experience than that. And so that was our motivation for trying to find a teaching job abroad.
If I'm not mistaken from your book, both you and Steve were planning on teaching adults because you had been doing that already to speakers of other languages, and you signed up to be a teacher. And I don't know, how did you sign up? Did you have a headhunter or a specific person looking for jobs for you?
Okay, that's a good question. We wanted to get certified because as you probably know, Greg, there are certifications for teaching English as a second language. It's not quite the same as a teaching degree. which actually Steve has a master's in education. I do not. But we got this CELTA certification, which is offered by Cambridge University. It's an internationally recognized certification. And when we finished, the CELTA program tried to help us identify opportunities for teaching abroad. That didn't work out too well. There were tons and tons of opportunities to teach English abroad, but when we started applying, we were not getting very good response. In fact, we weren't getting pretty much any response. And it's my opinion. I don't have facts to back it up, but I think it was really related to our age. I think most of the people that go abroad to teach are young adults, maybe just out of college. Maybe they're young teachers who want a new experience outside the US. And, old folks like Steve and me were not, the desired teacher demographic. So
I'm at 53, and I just had a conversation with a 50-year-old at my last conference I went to look for a job. I'm staying here, but when I got into this conversation, we talked about he's 50, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that," because both of us have been around the block a few times, and part of your problem is what you don't know about, what our listeners might not know, is that once you hit 55 or even 53, you find out that some countries, not the schools, but the countries that sign the work visa, right, which you well know from your experiment here, the work visa does not, the government does not allow people that are 55 or 60 to actually work. So it's not the schools as much as the governments around the world that we're dealing with, right? So Diane, you ended up looking at certain countries that would accept you, and I know there's some in Central and South America. There's some in Southeast Asia, and they're spattered, like they're salt and peppered around the world, and it's hard to really know which
mhm.
ones you can look at. So maybe there's another book out there somewhere that might help that search. We're going to try to interview some more teachers from overseas that have gone through this route and what they do when they reach close to 60. But I'm on that path right now. I have to think about where am I going to go next, or am I going to stay here for a while and then move on? At what age do I move? You and Steve ended up finding a job, and did you have a headhunter help you after a while because you got no responses?
Yeah, good question. I wouldn't call it a headhunter, but there are programs, and we signed up for a program that help place people in positions abroad. They kind of help you with looking for positions, even getting certified to teach English as a second language abroad, the visa issues, the housing question. Try to get you hooked up with housing, medical insurance, other kinds of insurance that you might need. So we signed up with a program like that. But even so, then this program operates in, I don't know, maybe a dozen or so different countries, partnering with organizations in those countries, in our case in Thailand. But even so, most of those programs had 60. At age 60, you were over the hill, and I was 59 at the time. I turned 60 in Thailand. My husband is a little older, so he was already over the hill. So we phoned one of these companies and had a conversation, and the charming young lady we spoke to said, "I think I can find a place for you. I think I have a connection in Thailand where they can bend these rules a little bit and find you a position." So we went with that. It was at that point, after looking for several months, that was the only lead that we had.
And when did you find out that they were going to place you? Like the minute she found a spot for you and said, "Okay, I want you to talk to these principals," was that like late in the year? I'm talking school year, like,
Okay.
or maybe not. I'm
Um,
not sure. How does that work?
so Thailand's on a different school calendar from the West. I'm not sure what it's like in Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
Um, we were not going for an entire school year. My mother is quite elderly, and I didn't want to leave her for an entire school year in Massachusetts. But we decided we'd go for one term. And the term that we were targeting was the term that begins in October and ends in early March.
Okay.
We did not have a position when we arrived in Thailand. This
Oh my
program
gosh.
it sends you to Thailand for an orientation, and the orientation is for 1 week. If you're doing the training for certification, it's another 2 weeks more after that, I think. But we were already certified, so we didn't do the training. But during that week, they place you with a school. You have interviews. You tell them what your preferences are. So we went to Chiang Mai, Thailand, which is in the northern part of the country, not knowing where we'd be living, what kind of people we'd be teaching. As you
Wow.
said, it's quite true. We would have definitely loved to be teaching adults. We love teaching adults. They're eager learners. They sit in their seats. They don't need to have their nose wiped. We love teaching adults. So we get to Thailand, and they are willing to place us, but they pulled us aside and they said, it may be a little trickier placing you than placing the rest of the people in this orientation session. So there were 25 of us in the orientation, Steve and me and 23 other people.
They're in their 20s, 30s, right?
Yeah, yeah. We called them 23 and we. They were like a different species of person from us. They were all young. They were there for all kinds of reasons. Some had teaching experience, some did not. They looked at us and they said, "Oh my gosh, I can't imagine my grandmother doing this," because I was
Granny's
old
gonna
enough
go
to
teaching.
be.
Yeah.
I was old enough to be their grandma. So it was very
Wow.
sweet. We were eventually offered a job. It was meant to be a shared teaching job. Steve and I would each teach half time. That was the offer. And lo and behold, it was in kindergarten, which is a
Wow.
far cry from the kind of students we wanted to teach. And actually, so I was thinking kindergarten, in the States, people start kindergarten at age 4 or 5. I don't know, Greg, how old are your
Right.
kindergartners?
Yeah, six and fives, and we have pre-kindergarten. But you guys, if I remember right from the book, they were like 2.5 years old or threes, right?
Yeah, yeah, the
That
majority
you
were
were teaching,
3.
and then Steve was teaching a couple a little bit older, and they didn't even split the job for you. They gave you each a position to teach kids all day. Wow.
Well,
Oh,
it was interesting. They have in Thailand, at least at our school, they had what they called K1, K2, and K3. And kids can begin K1 at age 2.5, and we had 2.5-year-olds for sure. And it was a small school. It was a private school. It was an English immersion program. So there weren't that many children. But I don't know. I'd never dealt with 2.5-year-olds in numbers greater than one single 2.5-year-old at a time. So, so this was to me overwhelming. They were adorable. They were sweet, but they were as rambunctious as any 2.5-year-old would be. Not all of them were fully toilet trained. They wore training Pampers, a few of them. So this was a really different teaching experience than having, for example, Afghan refugees coming to Washington needing to learn English to get a job. This was just completely different.
you're already a mother. Are you a grandmother too, by any
No,
chance? At the
no.
time, and at the time that you were teaching in Thailand, you had not had that experience since your daughter was that age.
That's right. Since my daughter was that age and
Wow.
I was almost 30 years younger, right? So,
Talk about out of your comfort zone. I mean, you're not teaching adults, you're teaching the opposite. They're not even potty trained, and you have to deal with them. Did you have an assistant in there with you?
I shouldn't complain. I'm making it sound really challenging, but I really shouldn't be complaining. There were 4 teachers for 14 students in this classroom.
Wow.
So it was 2 classrooms. It was K1 and K2. Oftentimes, the two groups were together for, various lessons and also for lunch and for playground time. So there was the head teacher who had been there since the school opened 2.5 years earlier. So it was this kind of a newish school. She was from the Philippines. There was another teacher who was from South Africa. And then there was the third teacher, and the third teacher was Steve/Diane. When push came to shove, we weren't actually job sharing. We were both at school full time, because the concept of job sharing wasn't known in the larger school environment, and it didn't seem wise to have other teachers in other grades in the other parts of the school seeing Steve or me go back to our living quarters in the middle of the day when, presumably we were supposed to be teaching. So we were really at school the whole day, and actually dealing with the children with the help of these more experienced teachers was okay. But eventually I needed to manage the classroom. And the term classroom management. It's probably the
Yeah.
fundamental zeroth order thing you do as a teacher. If you don't have control of your class, you don't get anything taught, and the kids don't learn much except how to annoy you. So they learned that skill very well, how to annoy me. But eventually, after a few months of frustration, I got to know them better. They got to know me better, and things smoothed out.
Well, I have to bow down to you because I have taught 3-year-olds and successfully, and I have plenty of stories about that. But I really want to bow down to you and say, wow, thank you so much for going and being so brave to do that, because it doesn't matter how many students you have. When they're 2 or 3 or in between, I can't go to the bathroom stuff. I can't do not with boys or girls. I'm just not comfortable with that. I need to have that assistant that takes care of that. And even in kindergarten, I have an assistant that comes in, or pre-K, not kindergarten, but pre-K, like 5-year-olds, they come into me and I have an assistant, and thank goodness, because I have to draw the line somewhere. And
Hmm.
I just can't do the whole bathroom thing. So, I mean, I had a girl that just sat down and just peed all over the rug one day. I'm like, hello, need help? Aisle 9, there's a cleanup. So there's no way. And, I guess the other thing is, don't sell yourself short at all, because the challenge is, I can see challenges almost every moment of the day when you first get to a new country. You don't know the language. The kids are developing their own home tongue as in Thai, as well as learning English. So a 2.5 to 3-year-old, for me, that is a monster challenge. That in a classroom environment, not only that, but you have stepped into, when you arrived, you stepped into a school that was already running, and they had their way of doing things, and you had to adapt to everything. Wow.
Right. Yeah. So, Greg, the issue there that was really interesting to me was, as I said, this was a new program within a larger school, English immersion, and the kids, as you say, were learning their own language, Thai. They had lessons in Thai twice a week, and they also had lessons in Chinese twice a week. There were
Wow.
visiting Chinese teachers who gave them Chinese lessons twice a week. But for the most part, classroom was English only.
So it's English only, and they go home and speak Thai, and they also have
Yeah.
training in
Oh,
Chinese.
yeah. So
Okay.
here's what I was going to say. So you said I had to adjust to the local teaching style and way of doing things. These kids at this very young age had lessons from 8:30 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon, with a break for lunch, and for the littlest ones a little nap. So they had mathematics kinds of lessons, geography, reading and language.
A two and a
It
half
was
year old.
very
Wow.
academic, and I had to teach these lessons. I had to keep these kids in their seats learning the alphabet, or whatever it was we were working on. To my way of thinking, when you're that age, you go to preschool basically to learn how to be a good friend, right?
And half a day, right?
Right, a few
For half a
hours.
day, you're with other kids to socialize and learn how to be a good person and be a good friend,
Hmm.
say nice things,
Yes,
right?
and listen to your teacher. That's the basic lesson, right?
But that's our way of doing it, right? It's not the way that the Thai school that you were at was a local Thai school, even though it was a private, and they have their way of teaching and their
Hmm.
way of their system, that the parents go and work and drop the kids off at school, and then they probably teach them at the after school too. I mean, I'm sure the kids just go home and melt.
Actually, we offered, I did not have this responsibility, but there were after school enrichment lessons, in addition to these academic lessons. And sometimes that would be doing the homework that was assigned. We We were supposed
Yeah.
to be assigning homework.
For two and a
And
half year olds, 3 year olds, 4 year olds. We'll take a moment's break now to remind you how to reach out to us. Of course, you can address any negative comments to Kent, the cat guy. We do love to hear from you. If you're out on Facebook, we don't do that, but our handle on both Instagram and Twitter are at ITPExpats with an S, ITPEXPATS. As a handle, if you want to, you can send us an old email at internationalteacherpodcast@gmail.com, or you can visit us at our new website at www.itpexpat.com. www.itpexpat.com. Well, back to the show. I tell you, I have a driver right now. It's a friend of mine that drives me around because I don't have a car. And when I go out into the city, he has a 3-year-old, and he's from India. This is exactly the conversation that I have with him. Mansoor's wife wants their son to always be doing something. So he has been around teachers from the West for so long, driving us around, and he has a different viewpoint on it just from listening to us talking in the car. And he calls his wife and says, "No, darling, I would just let him play this afternoon. Let him go out and play and rest and be with him as a mom, but don't sign him up for all of those classes." And I think it's a cultural thing, and we are not used to that. So you came into a completely different environment, and not only little ones instead of adults, but all of a sudden you have to sort of walk the walk as a guest, and you had to do it the way of the school. What a
yeah.
challenge.
And Greg, actually, in a way, it was a challenge, but in a way, it was a relief because there was a system and the expectations were, kind of clear.
Right.
I wasn't given a lot of guidance as to how to do it successfully, but at least I didn't have to figure it out. I wasn't left to my own devices.
You're a scientist and you like the method being spelled out and clear so that you can meet the expectation and work on the lesson plans and stuff. There was a part in there where you were told that you have to have your lessons plans for the rest of the term. So you and Steve had to sit down and write out like an entire term of lesson plans, not even knowing,
Yeah.
right? That was a little bit later on.
The irony of that, though, was we later learned that there was a reason that written lesson plans in a very specific format with a specific font and margins and yada yada. There was a reason for those, and that was because the Ministry of Education apparently does or could monitor or audit the schools and look at the lesson plans and look at the tests or assessments that are given to the students and give the school its accreditation based on those documents. So
I'll make you feel better because when I worked in Honduras, even at one of the big international schools, K through 12, I was teaching 5th grade, and at the end of the year, I had to use pencil, and then I had to use black pen. I would do it in pencil first. But they had 19 different courses, including PE and health and stuff, no matter if they really went to them or not. And I had to report at the end of the year, I had to take out a booklet that was done only in black pen, and I had to write down the entire year of grades and calculate them. And it was like from 0 to 100, like a number grade. They had to be handed in a specific time before I could submit, like before I could leave for the summer. And it was terrible. I didn't know why, and it was just because the university is what I wanted to say, but the Ministry of Education of that country, of Honduras, expects that. That's the way they do things. So even if I didn't teach the course, I was the homeroom teacher, and I had to do that for 32 students. So I had 32 fifth graders taking 19 different categories of grades, mine, like reading and math and social studies, etc., but also for PE and health and whatever else they did. And I had to fill them all in. It was horrible. But it's one of those things that it's expected of you. The first time you do it, you're like, oh, you're horrified. Like, why am I doing this meaningless work? I just want to be with kids or adults in your case.
yeah.
So, oh my gosh. Can I tell you a quick little story about me with the 3-year-olds?
I would love to hear.
Yeah. And it has to do with my name. Now, your name, Teacher Diane, is how you were addressed by your students, right? And Teacher
Yeah,
Steve?
that's the way that in Thailand it's either crew, which is the Thai word for teacher, and then the person's nickname, or if you're a foreign language teacher, then teacher in your own language, and then your first name, because they never ever use family names there.
So in Venezuela, that's interesting because in Venezuela we were teaching and it was basically last name, except for maybe kindergarten and stuff. But I was teaching K, like pre-K, even 3-year-olds, pre-K, all the way up to 11th grade at a small school of 200, but I had a class of each. So one day that the first year I was teaching there, the 3-year-olds walk into my classroom and they're all sitting on the carpet, like 15 of them, and an aide. And I'm just sitting there going, I've never taught this young grade level before. And I had been teaching for about 15 years by then, but never 3-year-olds. So I looked at all the kids and I said, I'm Mr. Lemoyne. And they all practiced it and tried it. And then I said, you could call me Mr. L if you want. But they never called me by my name. They'd always say Mr. or teacher. So about 3 weeks into it, after I had been working, and it was a computer lab, and I had them on like software, like Mickey Mouse stuff and shapes and names and words, and we would say hi, and then I'd put them immediately in chairs in front of computers. And that was the way we were doing it back then. But one day, this little boy raised his hand. He said, "Mr. Chicken." Mr. Chicken. And the reason he called me chicken was because that was the word that was on every computer when I logged in with a password was just
Oh,
chicken, right? And he watched me type it in and he got to know the word chicken. He heard the assistant and I talking about the password chicken. So he raised his hand. He says, "Mr. Chicken." And 15 3-year-olds started laughing their little butts off, right? And they didn't stop laughing for about 20 minutes. So I sat
uh-huh,
down on the carpet and just laughed with them. And
uh-huh.
then
And
and
flap
then
your wings.
they and then they go with the flow, right? So nothing happened that day except laughter. They all went away laughing. They must have told their brothers and sisters in the other grades because all of a sudden a first grader calls me Mr. Chicken. And the best thing about it was that for the rest of the year, these little 3-year-olds came in and smiling from ear to ear, and they never forgot Mr. Chicken.
Uh,
So whether it was just how great I was at giving them a Mickey Mouse, program on a computer, or if it was me, but my name, Mr. Chicken, stuck. So the next year I introduced myself to first, second, third grader as Chicken, and it stuck because they all do what you're doing now. They're all smiling from ear to ear.
yeah.
And that was years ago. That was probably, I want to say that was 13 years ago that happened. And now the kids still call me Mr. Chicken. And I introduce myself because they do that. They laugh and they giggle. And I say, with respect, no blue chicken, no, chicken buck, buck, buck with the arms or anything. But that's the children, the 3-year-olds just have joy.
Yeah.
And enough about me, but I want to know, how did you bring joy? Can you tell me some joy stories of teaching that you had with these 3-year-old?
I'll tell one little story. It happened near the beginning of my stay there, and I relate this in the book as well. Um, so the littlest children did get a little 40-minute nap session. And this was quite an ordeal. The first few days, I just couldn't believe that this was how kids took a nap in school. But basically, they would get changed out of their school uniforms into pajamas, unroll a bedroll, which was like a blanket with an attached pillows, lie down, try to sleep for 40 minutes, get woken up, get re-roll the bedroll, get back into their uniforms. This was all supposed to happen in 40 minutes. Well, the problem is those children had no idea how to take off their school uniforms, which buttoned down the front and had zippers, and they had no idea how to do their bedroll. So this was all the teacher's job to one by one get the kids going. And I thought, this is insane. I didn't say this is insane, but I thought this is insane as I was being shown how to implement this nap time, this very brief nap time. And so one little girl who was the littlest in the class, she was. Her parents later told me they were worried about her growth, that she was like 1 percentile of her age chart growth. Anyhow, she was a very small girl, but she was really smart and she was very cute and very clever. And so I thought, I'm going to teach this girl how to undress. And I asked her, do you know how to undo the buttons? And she didn't really know what I was talking about, but I showed her buttons and how to undo it. And she didn't know how to do it, but I took her little fingers and I pushed them through. And that day, she was fiddling around with her buttons at nap time as she was intrigued
The
by
whole
the concept.
time? The whole time.
Well, yeah. I mean, I could see she didn't. She never slept at nap time. She was much
Oh my
too. She
gosh.
had much energy and curiosity about the classroom to sleep. So it was really all pointless anyhow to get into the pajamas and out because she wasn't going to sleep anyway. Anyhow, the next day she comes to school. Her grandparents always dropped her off at school, and her grandmother, who didn't speak English, uh, gave me the Y. This is the Thai greeting where you put your hands together and bow your head, and everybody greets everybody that way. And the grandmother greeted me with a Y, and I Y'd back. And then she proceeded to thank me in her own way for showing her little granddaughter how to button buttons, and she asked her to show me how she could do it. She'd been practicing at home, and it was just so wonderful, so joyful to see that she had learned something, not ABCs necessarily on that particular day, but she learned something very practical, both for her and her grandmother, and definitely for me in the classroom, that maybe this kid can help at nap time getting dressed and undressed. So that was a joyful moment, and there were many, many others. The kids were I love them all. Some of them were harder to deal with than others, but I love them all. And I don't know if you've ever heard this sobriquet for for Thailand. It's called the Land of Smiles. Have you ever heard
Correct.
that?
Yep.
Thailand called that? Well, it sounds like a Thai Airlines kind of promo slogan, but it's really true. Thai people have almost invariably gorgeous smiles, and the children's smiles are the most gorgeous of all. So every time these kids laughed, every time they smiled, their faces lit up, as all children's do. But these are beautiful young people, and that brought me a lot of joy, regardless of whether we got our lessons done or not.
I was once asked if children are the same around the world. I was on another podcast and it was a question. And my immediate answer was yes. The
Hmm.
children are children. And something so wonderful, so innocent like that, it does not have to be math. It doesn't have to be science. It has to be how to get through life. And that little child will never forget the fact that her teacher, Diane, taught her how to do her buttons. She'll be telling that story for years and years to
Hmm.
come.
Well, I don't
And
know
the
if it affected
grandparents
her the way it affected me, but it made my day. That's for sure.
and the grandparents coming up to you with the bow and the Y and saying sodi ka, right? For
Mhm.
listeners, that's thank you, I believe. Am I right about that?
Actually, Sawatika is hello or
Oh,
goodbye. That's the
that's right.
greeting.
Kop
Uh,
kum ka.
Kapkunka, very good,
There we
very
go.
good.
That was it. I
Yes,
got
but
them mixed up.
also
So
said with the Y. Yes, it's a
with the
very.
Y, the grandmother coming up to you and saying "Kop kum ka" for you as a female and "Kop kum kap" for Steve, right? Was wonderful that you
Mhm.
would actually have the grandparents doing that the next day because you changed this girl's life just by taking the time to do this. You could have easily just thrown it off and had your assistant help her, but you took it upon yourself and said, "I'm going to do this," and it was a
Mhm.
teachable moment. What
Yeah.
a
Oh no, there
wonderful
was no
story!
assistant. So we were the junior
It's just
teachers.
you.
If there were assistants, it was Steve and me. No, no. I
Wow.
couldn't pass tasks off to anybody.
I want to get Steve on here too. I need to get him talking about this from his point of view. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
What a
Yeah.
wonderful. So you went from scientist to teacher of 2.5 to 3 year olds. So did Steve. And you went from science to this. And you're in a brand new country. And what I remember, I lived in Thailand for 2 summers doing
Oh.
diving down in Koh Tao. And I lived in Cambodia for 2 years, so I've been back and forth to Thailand many times. Two things come to mind, and it's usually the dogs with the t-shirts on, right? A lot of the stray dogs, at least in Bangkok, and the
T-shirts.
dog that adopted me, and they would put t-shirts on them And I just remember this. Maybe when you go back next time, maybe they stopped doing it. I don't know. Maybe it's post-COVID. They said no more T-shirts on dogs. But I remember T-shirt dogs, and I also remember the heat, the spicy heat of the breakfast soup, right? It's amazing that I've grown up throughout my life thinking that I can handle spicy foods. But yes, I remember you mentioned it in your book at one point too, like you took a bite of something, it was just like you're about to explode and you just can't eat any more of it. But you have to, if someone gives you food, you have to definitely, you can't let them see you throw food away.
Yeah.
Right. I think it was a little snapshot in your book that was talking about eating at a restaurant. You and Steve had gone to a restaurant and forgot how to say not so spicy, right? I
Yeah,
never learned that much Thai, but
right,
those are
right.
my
So yeah,
memories.
you're quite right. Thai people love their chilies. They kind of know that farangs, which is the word that they use for foreigners, it's not derogatory, but they kind of know that farangs maybe can't tolerate the heat, the food heat, the way that they can. But still, I think they don't appreciate the degree to which some people can't tolerate it. So we were at a street food vendor near our school, and we were taking Thai lessons. Actually, we were studying Thai with another teacher at school. We were exchanged. This was the best part of teaching English. We had a teacher who wanted to learn English, and we wanted to learn a little Thai. So we did a language exchange with her, and that was wonderful. I mean, she was eager to learn. She sat in her seat. She knew how to do buttons. She could even go to the bathroom on her own. She was great. Anyhow, so she was teaching us a little bit. So after our lesson one day, we tried to go order a meal across the street at the street food cart. And I thought that I had successfully ordered my meal in Thai and said, "My ped ka." My ped means no spicy or not much spice.
Okay.
And I thought I had done that. And so I took a big bite of my food when it arrived, and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't swallow.
Wow.
My pet didn't translate, or they didn't believe me, or or maybe what they gave me was my pet to their taste, but not to my taste. Anyhow, yeah. So yeah, not taking the heat in food is something you have to get over in Thailand.
Well, for our listeners, I just want to repeat this is your book called Kindergarten at 60. Your name is Diane, and your last name, Diane? Do you want to
It's Diane
publicize that
Seidel, and it's
so
spelled
they can find your book?
Seidel. Yeah.
Okay, so Diane Seidel is a former scientist, well, always a scientist, but she went from the science industry and from worrying about our environment as a job and a profession. And she and her husband, Steve, decided to go overseas and they landed in Thailand to teach kindergarten at even at 2.5 to 3 year olds. And your book is coming out June 20th.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll be able to find it on Amazon
On
or is through your
Amazon, on
publisher?
bookshop.org if you prefer independent bookstores, Barnes and Noble, and yeah, if you just Google Kindergarten at 60, it should pop up. Yeah,
And I think we can pre-order this if we want to, correct?
you can. The print versions of the book are available for pre-order now. There's an audiobook in production that's not quite yet available for pre-order, but if you're an audiobook reader, as I am personally, hold on, and that will be also available by the 20th of June.
Well, it's been really wonderful to talk to you. I'm just trying to keep your time short that you need to get to another engagement. Are there any final words that you want to share with us or comments?
Yeah, well, first, Greg, I want to say thank you for your interest in the book and in my story. I guess my final closing thoughts is that if you are in the age bracket that I'm in, and if you have an inclination to give teaching abroad a shot, and haven't done it before, unlike you and some of your listeners who are professional teachers and have been for years, there are opportunities. So one can try doing what we did, which was go for a multi-month stay, or a part of a school year, or even a whole school year. But there are also shorter-term opportunities. Steve and I just returned from Italy, where we spent 2 weeks teaching middle school conversational English, and And that was a lot easier to arrange. We were volunteers. We went with a program that is known for these kind of short-term volunteer projects. It was very well run. We had a great time, and so there are other ways. I didn't know about these opportunities before, but now I do. So there are lots of opportunities.
Well, welcome. Thank you so much for this. If you can shoot me a couple of those in an email, I can put them underneath the podcast. Otherwise, we will just put the link for your book on Amazon to pre-order. And I just think that our listeners can learn so much from you. It's inspiring that you have done this at a later age, an opportunity that's opened up, and it's inspiring that you have stepped into our role after doing something so important for so long beforehand. And like you said before in your book, active retirement, right, Diane?
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much for being a part of our podcast. Hopefully I can get your husband, Steve, on, and we'll get his side of the story at some point, right? Or we can... Where's your next stop? Do you have another one after Italy? Have you decided?
Haven't decided yet. I'm still processing. We really just returned a couple of weeks ago. I'm kind of still processing the Italian adventure. But I definitely would like to do this again. But come spring term, I'll be back at Washington English Center teaching the adults I love to teach, the people who have come from all over the world to make a life in America, but who need English to get jobs and to become citizens and to reestablish their world here. So that starts in just a few more weeks, and I'm really so much looking forward to seeing those people again.
So this is Greg, the single guy, signing off from the International Teacher Podcast with our guest as I bow with a Y and hand signal and say Kup Kum Krap. And thank you very much for being on our show, Diane. We'll see you again, Diane Seidel.
I say thank you, Greg Lemoyne. It's been a pleasure. Kup Kum Pa Sawat.
Thank you so much.